Welcome to Kanopy Conversations, where we dive deep into the stories behind the stories, spotlighting the filmmakers, thinkers, and changemakers whose work is streaming now on Kanopy. I'm your host, Christian Pierce. Today, we're honored to be joined by writer-director Will Seefried, whose haunting and deeply human debut feature, Lily's Not For Me, has been making waves since its premiere at the Edinburgh International Film Festival. We'll talk with Will about the process behind the film, the themes he wrestled with, and what this project means to him as a filmmaker and a storyteller. Will, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Christian, thank you so much for having me.
As we kick off our conversation, I always like to begin by asking how you got started in this industry. Kanopy is a streaming platform available to many university students who are about to embark on their own careers. Given that you've worked both in front of the camera and behind it, we'd love to hear about your journey and how it began.
Man, I mean, it's it's always strange to look back and think, where did this all start? I mean, I got involved from a really young age with theater. That sort of felt like the place where I found the people who I connected with and where there was like a vehicle for self-expression. And that what's accessible, I mean, probably a lot of your Canopy viewers and subscribers, like it's people who that's what they have access to, like theater is a lot more accessible than filmmaking, or at least when I was growing up. Now it's different. But so I got started there and sort of followed that path as an actor for a long time. And a big dream of mine was to be on a TV show. That was sort of my like vision of what stability would look like as an actor. Like I'm a series regular on a TV show. And then when that finally happened, I was there and I was like, oh, this isn't what I thought. And I don't, that hole in me isn't filled by this. And I found myself like constantly wandering over to Video Village where the showrunner was and the directors and the way that they were working. And I sort of realized that I was more interested in what was going on in that part of set than the part that I was occupying. So I decided to try my hand at making some stuff on my own. I started with a little web series and then which I was still acting in. So I was sort of straddling the two worlds. But I feel like the real sort of first step into filmmaking for me was with my first short film, Homesick. And that just was a moment in life where it just sort of like, when you're editing something and the sound is like just off of the picture. Like I felt like my whole sort of creative life had been that way until making Homesick. And then it was just like finally lined up. And I just sort of was like, oh, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. So I let go of all of my acting representation and was like, I'm going, full force after the writing and directing thing. And so I've been sort of chasing that dream ever since.
That's great. I love how you described finding your tribe because creatives, that's definitely something we all tend to do is we look for that group of people that can relate to our creative process and essentially how our mind works. I loved how you literally talked about lining. I mean, as someone who's edited enough video in my time, there is that magical moment where it's like, oh wow, that's a really good edit and it hits the beat of music just as I wanted it to. Uh, you know,
Right.
whether intentional or not, sometimes you get lucky, but a lot of times that creative work really illustrates kind of the inner workings of your mind and brain, and a brave decision to let your representatives go. I'm impressed.
Well,
That's bold.
it was actually while I was busy trying to write Lily's Not For Me, the film that is going to be on Canopy at the time. And remember, it was just this really funny tension of that I was obsessed with writing the movie. And it's this very, it's a period romance and it's dark and it's haunting. And I'd be like so in the zone of working on that, and then would get an email from my agent at the time that's like, hey, like, please come audition for this CBS pilot to be sort of like a, med student who's doing it. And I was like, I can't move between these two ways of being so quickly. And so I ultimately was like, if I really want to do this, then like, I have to like zero in on it. So it was very scary, but ultimately I left and Annette appeared, thank goodness.
Well, congrats. I've seen the final product and it's worth the journey. So I'm very pleased to hear your focus, and you're kind of zeroed in on the writing and that process. And that's where I would like to let's jump into your film. Let's
Yeah.
it's a great summary of your journey, but I would love to get to, kind of the nuts and bolts of your process, and ultimately, what we see on screen. Uh,
Mm.
let's talk just a little bit. What's the initial spark of this idea? Because as you just pointed out, you're also the writer of this film, which is an important note because we speak with a lot of filmmakers who are not, at a computer, typing away, scene by scene, line by line. So, what was the spark that led to this moment that, I need to make this title?
Well, I'd always been fascinated by sort of the phenomenon of conversion therapy and how it's like permeated our culture in so many ways that it just kind of feels like this concept of needing to be, I mean, not just heterosexual, but models of masculinity. It just feels like it's kind of in the water in a lot of ways, at least in the place that I grew up. And so I'd always been really curious about it and started doing sort of a little personal research project into like the history of these practices. I was like, I wanted to understand where this came from, how it started, and how it sort of gained the institutional support that it had for much of the last sort of century, and so it was in that process that I found like two little like pieces of information that just got really caught in my psyche. The first was about the procedure that is depicted in the film, that I won't say specifically what it is for people who are going to go watch it, but it was a physical procedure that was claiming to cure homosexuality. And it is a brutal procedure, and it really got caught in my psyche as this like physical expression of the emotional message that I had received through so much of my life. And I feel like a lot of other queer people have also received, not even just queer people, people in general, about how you're supposed to be. So that really just like got caught in my heart. And then sort of a parallel to that was I learned that in a lot of institutions where homosexual men would go to be cured, that they part of their treatment was having to go on dates, like these faux dates with the young nurses who worked in these institutions. But it was all of these like funny gay guys and all these young nurses who formed these really amazing friendships. And there were these accounts of nurses becoming sort of radicalized within these institutions and fighting back against them from within to help these guys get discharged and to go and get back to their lives and back to their lovers. And so I thought that those two stories felt complementary, that they like lived in the same world, but were really different sides of the same coin. In some ways, it was like the light and the shadow within this history. And so, like a quote that we've turned to a lot through this process is light and shadow reveal form. And to me, like trying to reveal the form of this experience and this cultural phenomenon, that I thought that those two stories coming together could really illuminate that in a different way. And so that was sort of what set the idea into motion.
The film explores the trauma of conversion therapy, and again, we won't reveal all the details because it's what much of the narrative's about. But it does so with a really quiet intensity. How did you balance? Because there's an element of history here that you need to account for, with, I imagine, quite a bit of accuracy. But how did you balance that with the emotional storytelling? Because again, you've got, there's elements of, friendship and romance, but then there's also, very clinical, diagnoses and, again, therapy, as they labeled it. But how do you navigate and kind of walk that tightrope?
It's a continuous process, like through the entire journey of making the film. You're always on that tightrope, so there was, in the writing process, was one version of that, of trying to thread the needle of the like, as you're saying, sort of historical accuracy and wanting to capture that, but then also just the emotional storytelling, because ultimately I think there are some filmmakers who are really like mission driven, in the sense that their work, the primary function of it is to make a political statement. And I am happy if this does make a political statement, but my primary desire as an artist is to tell human stories and to like activate compassion and a sense of freedom in the viewer. And so So I had to sort of keep looking at the historical parts of things and then bringing myself back to what is the human story here, you know? And so that began in the writing process and then continues through production when you're working with your department heads and with actors, that everyone has different ways of working. Some people are really cerebral and intellectual about things, others are much more emotional or visual. And so it's having to learn the language of the people that you're working with and trying to feel like a lot of the job as a filmmaker is trying to be a supportive counterpoint to people's tendencies. So when an actor gets really pulled into their head, that your job is to sort of bring them back to the emotion. Or when someone gets really swept up in the feeling but loses touch with some of the concrete realities, you have to be that gentle tether to that. And so there's that process. But I think the real balancing act is in the edit, where you have all of this material and like there are versions of the film that are much colder and more clinical and more uh, historical in tone, and then there are versions that would be much more melodramatic and much more emotional and much more sort of like wet in that way. And so with my editor Julia Block, who's brilliant, which is its own writing process is the editing, but we really wanted to find that sweet spot in the middle where those two things could complement each other, and ultimately be in service of an experience rather than just an idea.
I mean, as you note, this is at its essence is a very human story. With that, you've assembled a remarkable cast, including Fionn O'Shea in the lead as Owen. What was your casting process like, and what did each actor bring to the role? And I'm also going to ask this based on your background. How did your background as an actor help in that selection process, or as you mentioned on set, steering them to ultimately capture what you need and want in the film itself?
Mm. I mean, I'm so in love with all of the actors from the film. So it's like I just adore them. And I mean, my path to filmmaking was as an actor. So really, that's kind of my first language as an artist. And as a filmmaker, I'm much more literate in talking to actors than I am in the technical side of filmmaking, you know? And so I think I was excited to have real teammates in that sense, like to find actors who I could have that shared language with, and also who were willing to have patience with me as I'm learning this other side of filmmaking as well, because this is my first feature. And as much as you try to learn as much as you can and prepare yourself as much as you can, like it's always learning on the job, you know? So, but the process with the cast was actually pretty organic. My husband, who also produced the film, Hannes Otto, he studied at Juilliard and was a year apart from Rob Aramayo, who plays Philip in the film. And so I knew Rob from back when we started dating and had been a fan of his work for a long time, and always had wanted to find something to do with him. And after we made Homesick, he saw that and was like, "I'd love to find something to work on, man." You know, and I was like, "Great, let's," like, and then I'd written this role, and I was like, I think this would really be something that would be different for Rob, and that he could bring a really beautiful, nuanced, fresh perspective to it. So I shared the script with him, and I was like, "Take a look and see what you think." And he thankfully connected with it and wanted to come aboard. And he was really the first person to say yes to it. Like there was nothing in place at this stage. It was just me, my husband, and a script, and that was sort of where we were. But through Rob saying yes, it led to actually, I wound up signing with his agents, who then represented the film and then who helped us to find other producing partners and to start putting the cast together. But it was a very organic process, the rest of the cast coming into place. Rob was doing another film, a Samuel Beckett biopic called Dance First with Fionn O'Shea. And he was working with him as we were trying to figure out who our Owen would be. And he was like, I think this could be the guy. And so I did a deep dive into Fionn's work and was like, oh, yeah, I think so too. And so he actually put himself on tape so that I could see him in the material. And it was just like a no brainer. He just had that poetry of Owen so in his bones. And then I had been following Aaron Kellyman and Lewis Hoffman, both of their work for a long time, and admired them both. And they had been sort of in my dream vision board of like, who could be in this movie? Who could these people be in these roles? I mean, Lewis, like, I pictured him so, and Aaron in these roles even when I was writing. And so turns out that Fionn coincidentally met Lewis one night while we were talking about who to cast as Charlie. And so that led to that. Actually, that same night, he ran into Erin at a party, which was part of what like began going out to her. So it was a it was a really organic process of finding people and building a team. And they're all just amazing.
Yeah, so much of this industry is those human connections. It's who you know and those, talking with somebody and letting them know, hey, this is the idea I have and what I'm working on next. Are you interested? And I'm pleased to hear that that is still the case. As
Yeah.
someone who's been at this for a long time, much of what I've done and experienced over the course of my career has been based on that network of amazing collaborators. Because let's be honest, I mean, at the end of the day, a film it takes a village, right? I mean, it takes so many people to furnish that film. So I want to talk about that just a little bit because, as you mentioned, this is your directorial debut feature. You have done short films before, but this is your first feature length project. What surprised you most about bringing this process and this story to life from script to screen as a feature versus say what you were initially doing with your shorts? Were there bigger challenges? Were things smoother? I would love to know because we on Canopy we house a lot of short films and work with a lot of short filmmakers, and it's a transition we talk about a fair bit as most directors look to do, may start with a short and then obviously aspire to do a feature. You've accomplished that goal. So would love to know, what was that process? What was that transition like?
That's a great question. I mean, it's a really big transition. In a lot of different ways. I mean, creatively, you're having to wrangle a much more sort of unwieldy beast of a thing, a feature. There's like so many more, at least in our case, with the scale of this film, there were so many more people, so many more elements. It was a period film. It had a lot of locations. We shot in South Africa, so there was a lot to manage, a lot of people, a lot of scenes, a lot of like it just as the scale of it obviously was totally different than a short film. And I think what I didn't realize going into it was that part of doing all of that is about being really connected to a place of uh, not being okay with not knowing. Like going into a feature, there's just going to be things that you don't know from making a short, and that for me, that was sort of like the key to unlocking the process was surrounding myself with people who are experts at what they do, who are comfortable with me not being an expert at what I do yet, and of being really willing to say, "Oh, I don't know that term. I don't know what that means. Sorry, can you explain that to me?" And to not sort of come into the process as like an egomaniac director that's like, this is my debut feature. And so like my vision is perfect and unchanging. Like it's just not what it is. So I think that for me, creating, just being really transparent about all of that and surrounding myself with people who were into that, who weren't looking for someone who's going to perform like the stoic leader, but who is able to say, let's figure this out together. Um, so that was part of what surprised me. And in terms of transitioning from a short film, um, it's just a real game of endurance. I actually trained to, I'm not like a runner, but I trained to run a half marathon right before we started production because I was like, this is going to be my training in endurance for this because it's not just getting through production and being on set. Like that was the part I thought about. The edit is its own act of endurance. Like our edit was actually pretty short. We had 10 weeks and that it's all day, every day, alone in a small dark room with one other person, or sometimes when our assistant editor was there too. That's its own form of endurance. And then the festival submission process, the premiere process, navigating reviews and distribution and releases and all of it. It's like, I mean, it's July 2025 right now. I wrote the first draft of Lilies in January of 2021. So that's not in the world of filmmaking, like 5 years isn't the longest amount of time but it is a real act of endurance. And I guess something I would say to people who are looking to make that transition from short films to feature film is to really make sure that when you're working on a feature, it's something you want to devote that much life and energy to. Because I think if you don't, I know now when I'm looking at things that I'm going to do next and choosing material, I'm so much more rigorous about it because of how much it demands of you, you know? And so I would just say it has to be something that like burns inside of you. And also just for a first feature. And I mean, usually that's what a first feature is anyway, that it's the story you've got to tell. And so that's yeah.
No, yeah, it's a wonderful. I love how you focus on the devotion because, to your point, especially as you're learning in the moment with a debut feature, it's a recurring theme we've had in these conversations because we have spoken with many filmmakers who are just getting their start behind the camera, and it's they all possess that passion that you just highlighted because it the production part of it is but a fraction of what it takes to make a feature film. You mentioned 10 weeks of editing. Post production is grueling, and it's minutia. You're focusing on the smallest points, frames of film, right? I mean, that's how detailed you need to be. And kudos to the editors out there because they understand this more than most. But
Mhm.
it's a labor of love is the entire filmmaking process, and your passion is jumping off the screen now, and it certainly is evident in your film. From start to finish, you can see the craft behind the title because it doesn't read as a debut feature. Again, it's very polished. And it's is astounding to view. I want to talk a little bit about those technical aspects of the film, if we can, for a moment. Specifically, your setting and cinematography. The film overall features a very muted color palette, and would be interested to hear about that decision. And it also makes, and I love you brought it up earlier. Your theme of light and shadow because it's such an important part of your cinematography because there is such a balance of light and shadow throughout the film. There's some really striking images of cast members in dark shadow being lit through a window. Very low light environments as they're in the cottages. So you've got to look very closely and attentively because it's a low lit setting. Uh, I'd just love to hear about some of those decisions and some of the aesthetics that you brought to the screen, whether those were things that you came up with or your collaborators. Again, would just love to hear that part of the process.
Yeah. Well, I think like a guiding principle for us in terms of the visual aesthetic actually was best articulated by a question that our costume designer, Grace Snell, asked me in our first interview about the film, where she asked, "Is this film a painting or is it a photograph?" And I love that question because it really gets to the question of, especially with a historical film, is what you're seeking is to create something in its exactness and accuracy, or is it about an emotional interpretation of that history? So for me, I immediately was like, it is a painting, you know, and that was so important in the visual language and how I worked with all of the different department heads to try and create that. But I mean, the real like MVP here is our cinematographer Corey Freeman Lott, who he shot Homesick, so we met doing that, and thankfully had this incredible connection and collaborative relationship that began there. And so he came on board Lily's pretty early, like long before there was any financing or producers or actors or anything. He and I were having sort of weekly Zoom meetings, like going through and trying to build a visual language and a shot list. And by the time we got to production, we had done sort of like three drafts of a complete shot list for every single shot in the whole film. And we were both walking around with a little like printed spreadsheet with it all the entire time, like crossing things off as we go. And we're losing light, like doing that. So Corey brought this like expertise to the cinematography side of things, whereas I was coming into those conversations with a lot more sort of emotional and textural impulses. So, I was showing him a lot of paintings like Salvatore, his paintings and his use of the color green was so central to me, where I was like, this feeling, what this articulates. And he's like, oh, so lower light natural sources in the cottage, like these little pools of warmth that there's like mystery that's cast in the shadows. I was like, yes, exactly, like that is the thing I'm showing you and trying to communicate. And then he was able to help find the language for that and then to execute it in, with the resources we had and the spaces we were working in. So it was a really collaborative process with Corey, and then with our production designer Barry LaRue, of trying to create these spaces and create the distinction between the visual language. The film, for people who are going to watch it, is divided sort of between two worlds. There's this like cottage in the countryside, and then there's a institution, like a psychiatric institution. And so we had different visual languages for each, from lighting and color, but also in terms of the camera movement. The way that we were shooting those spaces had really different visual languages and sets of rules that we were adhering to. So a lot of the challenge was figuring out how those things are different, but also are in conversation with each other. And then in terms of the craftsmanship of it, is not just sort of shooting both things and being like, we'll figure it out in the edit, but of really creating those visual bridges between the two things. So that's where some of the like match cuts that we have between the different spaces, a lot of like, there's sections where we're going back and forth almost shot for shot in the two spaces. So we really tried to build that connective tissue, so that even though there's different visual languages, that they're bleeding into each other over the course of the film, and that helps to tell one cohesive story, as opposed to be like, why are these two films being smashed together? Like, we really wanted to feel of a whole.
The visual landscape of this film is incredibly rich, and the transitions, as you mentioned, from the two primary settings are very smooth. And I will forever have in my mind burn the image of Erin across the table, because she's just so beautifully lit, and the costume with her nurse hat and her attire overall. It's a beautiful photograph. But as you mentioned, much of your cinematography and the visuals were inspired by painting. It is equally as beautiful if it were a painting. I was just incredibly impressed, and I'm for especially for a feature debut, just how complex the visual landscape was throughout the film, and I wanted to applaud you for that. It was a question I was like, oh, if we have time, I'll ask it, but I'm so glad I did, because your answer was phenomenal. And again, it really shows your attention to detail, and I want viewers to, because so much of today we tend to passively watch. We'll watch while we're on our phone, or we'll watch while we're reading an article or listening to the news, or we're washing the dishes, right? We tend to do other activities. This is a film you need to sit and watch, just
Yeah.
actively engage with and watch, because it deserves that. Because like I said, the craft is so evident throughout. It's a beautiful story, but it's also such a beautiful film. And sometimes you get one or the other. This film has both. So for our viewers, please sit and watch it, devoted to this narrative and this story, and don't be distracted. Pick a night or an evening where you can just spend a moment, in your living room, just attentive to the film, because it is such a beautiful title. And I wanted to applaud you all for that, because so much of today, sometimes we neglect that, but this is a film I want to check that box, because its cinematography is just so striking. It's so beautiful to look at.
Well,
All right.
thank you. I appreciate it. And I will make sure I tell Corey that
Yeah, please. Please relay that feedback, because uh,
I
you know,
certainly will.
we see a lot of period pieces on Canopy. It's, kind of our bread and butter. We get a lot of these, films set in, turn of the century. And again, from a visual standpoint, this was definitely a high point. I was like, I got absorbed into the visual landscape. It was that rich, and that sophisticated. And love the use of light and shadow. The cottage setting is so low lit. I literally I leaned in, which I don't do often. I was like, I need to see what's in this scene. Uh, all right, so we're wrapping up. I just want to close. We ask this sometimes, and a lot of filmmakers are reluctant to answer, which is fine, because sometimes you want to leave this to the viewer. Uh, but Lily's Not For Me is now streaming on Kanopy. What do you hope viewers take away from the film? And what conversations maybe do you hope this might spark?
Above anything else, what I hope is that people will feel empowered to reclaim narratives that maybe haunt them, and to feel a sense of authority to tell their own story, whether it's literally their own story or a story of a community that they're a part of, or just a broader experience that they had, the experience of grief, the experience of falling in love, to take those things and to give you to have a sense of authority in telling the story for yourself as you see it, as you wish to.
No, I think that's a great summary. And I like how you tied it to Owen, because so much of his journey is people trying to change him. And Owen is very resistant of that. And he knows who he is, he knows his identity, and repeatedly tells other characters, you do you. I know who I am. And I think that's very important, especially in this moment in time, where people want to be able to see a journey like that and understand, especially young people as they, question, who am I supposed to be and what am I supposed to do and what's my, path, whether it's career, personal, professional. Uh, Owen, I think, is a character you can follow, and definitely treat as a lead, despite everything that happens in his life. He's a crucial character and a brave character. So I just want to thank you again for this film, and thank you for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your time and your vision with us. Lily's Not For Me is a powerful, poetic film that lingers long after the credits roll. And we're so proud to have it streaming on Kanopy. Again, Will, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Christian. Really nice talking with you.
To our viewers, if you haven't yet watched Lily's Not For Me, you can stream it now on Kanopy in the United States and Canada through participating libraries and universities. And if today's conversation moved you, please share the episode and leave us a review. Until next time, I'm Christian Pierce, and this has been Kanopy Conversations, where we speak with the minds behind the movies.